So right now, I'm at the intermediate stage of learning Russian, somewhere around B1 level. To get to the next level, I'm trying to get as much comprehensible input into my brain as possible. And for me, that means doing a lot of reading. Nothing can really take the place of reading if you want to absorb large quantities of a language and truly understand how it's put together. When you read, you are literally seeing the language laid out in front of you, which allows you to perceive and analyze how different elements of the language interact with each other. Reading is also a phenomenal way to be exposed to a large number of both familiar and unfamiliar words. So, reading is important. Today, I'm going to talk about my simple but effective two-color highlight method for reading in a foreign language. In this case, Russian. So first of all, when and how often do I read? Well, reading is an essential part of my language learning routine, so it's something that I schedule into my day as a priority. I prefer to read early in the morning when my brain is working best. Believe it or not, this is actually one of my favorite parts of the day. It's quiet, it's peaceful, caffeine is going into my bloodstream, and I'm reading an interesting story. I keep my reading sessions strictly to 30 minutes or less because that's the maximum amount of time that I can concentrate on this kind of cognitively demanding task. When I'm reading, I give it my full attention. As soon as I reach 30 minutes, that's it. I finish the sentence that I'm on, I mark where I'm up to, and I do something else. I read every morning and sometimes in the afternoon or evening if I have time. I use an iPad because I find it to be the most practical way to store and access a large number of books. I can easily highlight words and write annotations in, and my progress automatically syncs to my other devices. In the long run, it's also cheaper than buying a huge number of paper books. Next, what exactly am I reading? Well, at the moment, I'm reading Russian short stories by Ollie Richards. This book contains 8 short stories that are very well written, interesting, and set in a variety of locations and historical periods. Now, on the front cover, this book claims to be suitable for beginners, but it really is not. Okay, these stories range in difficulty from A2 to B1 and sometimes higher. And in case you want to argue about this, I've asked ChatGPT, so that's the end of that discussion. If you really are a beginner, you should start with the most basic A1 level material. Whatever level you're at, it's important to find content that is at the right level of difficulty for you. It should challenge you without being overwhelming. For beginners and intermediate learners, I recommend using graded readers specifically written for adult language learners. Some language experts say that you should go straight to authentic material, so stuff like newspapers or novels, even as a beginner, but I disagree with this. I'm almost at that stage, and I'm planning to do that soon, but for now, I'm working my way through graded readers because these books are specifically written by language teachers for people like me. So what is my reading process? Well, I begin by finding the sentence that I got up to the previous day, which is easy because it's always marked in green. I keep track of where I am in a book by highlighting the sentence that I'm up to. I find this to be more precise than using the built-in bookmark system, especially as I have my iPad set to scroll mode and not page turn mode. Once I've found my spot, I start reading the story, just like I would read any other book. I continue reading until I get to a sentence whose meaning is unclear. This is where I start to do a bit more work. If I can't understand a sentence, it's usually because it contains one or more unknown words. First, I read the entire sentence and try to intuit the meaning of the unknown word by looking at the context. If that doesn't work, I read the next sentence and reread the sentence before to look for additional context. I also analyze the unknown word itself. Firstly, what type of word is it? Is it a noun, adjective, verb, adverb? And secondly, does it resemble or does part of it resemble a word I do know? By following these steps, I can usually figure out the meaning of a word without any additional help. As an example, let's have a look at an excerpt I recently came across in this Ollie Richards book. This translates basically word for word as, Larissa raised a hand and started to say, "Please, wait a minute." The crowd, something. So here's the unknown word, zatikla. So to figure out the meaning of this word, let's look at the context. This character, Larissa, has raised a hand and spoken to a crowd and said, "Please, wait a minute." So she probably has something to say to them, right? So what would a crowd logically do in this situation? Well, everyone would probably stop talking and turn around and pay attention to her, right? So based on that context, there's a good chance that zatikla means to stop what you're doing or to pay attention or something like that. Secondly, let's analyze the word itself. I already know that ticha means quiet in Russian, and I can see that zatikla contains this fragment tich, which is very similar to ticha. Thirdly, since the only other word in the sentence is a noun, zatikla is most likely a verb, and it certainly looks like a verb. So combining all of these clues, I'm 99% sure that tapla zatikla means the crowd quietened down, or the crowd became quiet, and that's exactly what it does mean. Of course, in some cases, I'm simply not able to figure out the meaning of a word. In those cases, I highlight the word or sentence and press translate. I then copy and paste the translation into a note, which I highlight with yellow. So the next time I read through this passage, I can check the meaning of that word with one tap of a finger. Of course, I could click on translate straight away, but the process of trying to figure out the meaning teaches you a lot about the language. Anytime you're actively engaging with the language, the chances of encoding and recalling that information is much higher. So let's say that I've finished reading the whole book and I've marked in all the words that I didn't know together with their translations. What do I do next? Well, I've only completed the first part of the reading process. The next step, the step that most people neglect when they're trying to learn anything, be it a language or a musical instrument or martial arts, whatever, is repetition. You must use repetition to consolidate the information and concepts that you've already been exposed to. So my next step will be to read the same book at least 2 more times. And I can't stress this enough. It's in the second and third readings that the real understanding and progress take place. This is where your brain really starts to make sense of things. So let's imagine that I'm reading this book for the second time. This is where my 2-color highlight system comes into play. When I encounter a word highlighted in yellow, I test my knowledge by reading the sentence without looking at the note. If I can't understand the sentence without checking the note, it means that I haven't yet internalized the meaning of that word, so I leave the note yellow. If I can understand the sentence without looking at the note, then I keep the note, but I change the color to blue. So as I read through the same book for the second, third, fourth time, more and more highlights will change from yellow to blue as I absorb more and more of the vocabulary. Occasionally, some notes will change from blue back to yellow as I forget the meaning of words that I previously knew, which is quite normal. By the time I read the same book for the third time, I now know a lot more vocabulary than I did during the first and second readings. So I start pushing myself to read a little bit faster and to not get bogged down in the details. After the third reading, I'll usually switch to a different book and repeat the same process before coming back to this book a few months later. You don't have to read the same book 3 times in a row. You can read it, read something else, come back to it, read it again, read a couple of other things, come back to it, read it again, and so on. However, I would really recommend reading the same book at least twice in a row to begin with. You want to give your brain the shortest possible interval in the beginning to review and consolidate the information. What I like about this 2-color system is that it shows me my progress. Yellow indicates the words that I still need to learn, while blue indicates the words that I have learnt. I can clearly see how my vocabulary has grown over time. When I revisit books that I haven't read in a while, I'm often surprised at how easy they are, and it's a huge boost to my confidence. I should also mention that if I want to study the unknown words on their own, I can click on Notes and Highlights and it shows me a list of all the notes that I've made through the entire book. I hope that this process doesn't sound too complicated, okay? At the end of the day, all I'm doing is reading a book several times, trying to read it a little bit faster and with better comprehension each time, and using 2 different colors to keep track of what I do and don't know. My method is simple, but is based on powerful principles and can be adapted to your particular situation. I find that this careful and repetitive reading process gives me a depth of understanding and fluidity with the language that I don't get from any other process. When I do this every day in the foreign language that I'm studying, I find that everything improves. My speaking becomes noticeably smoother, I use a wider vocabulary in conversations, and my listening comprehension improves. So to sum up, this is my simple and effective process for reading in a foreign language. Find a regular time to read every day when your brain is functioning well. Read for 20 to 30 minutes at a time with full concentration. Pick content that challenges you but doesn't overwhelm you. Use context and word analysis to guess the meaning of words you don't know. Highlight words and phrases you can't figure out and attach a translation. Use one color for the words you need to learn and a different color for the words you have learned. And finally, read the same material several times. If you found this video interesting or useful, or maybe even both, please consider subscribing. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.